know that guys walk here? Did you know guys walk here?
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Daryl Moss. This is On Deck Live, raw, uncensored, unfiltered, all about being Black in America. We have our panelist, Mr. Hanif Nelson, who's always with us. And today we also have a special guest, Ms. Tyra Parrish from the Pioneer Valley Project. Good afternoon, people.
Good afternoon.
All right. So, Hanif, as usual, I'll let you set it off. Just tell people who you are, what you do, and then we can get right into the conversation.
My name's Hanif Nelson. I'm an educator, musician, and panelist for On Deck. Great to be here today.
All right. And we also have Tyra Parrish. If you want to tell folks who you are and what you do.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tara Parrish. I'm the director of Pioneer Valley Project, a grassroots community organization here in Springfield.
Well, all right. And today's conversation, we're going to talk about accountability, public accountability. What that means is we address public officials in any capacity, whether they're mayor, whether they're governor, state legislator, Congressman Neal, doesn't matter. What exactly is accountability? What is the right way to hold someone accountable publicly? Where is the right place? And what is the right time? Oftentimes, when you have people who are very active and passionate about what they do, when you can't get the response that you need from a public official, a city official, and you're constantly requesting meetings, you're requesting to have conversations, and it seems like everywhere you turn, you get denied. So you happen to see the person out in public, as Mr. Charles Stokes did last Saturday in the great city of Springfield. You hold the mayor accountable, and I tell you, I was in so many conversations with people who felt that he was absolutely wrong in terms of what he did, how he did it, and when he did it. And my thing is, when it comes down to violent crime, when it comes down to economic development, bottom line, when it comes down to equality and equity, period, across the board, regardless of who it's for, when is the right time to hold a public official accountable? When you vote people in office, you're basically hiring them to provide a service for you in your community. And when they don't do due diligence, what's the resolve? What's the course of action? So today we're going to talk about that. Once the clip, actually, I'm going to play the clip, and then I'm going to ask Hanif and Tara for their feedback on that. And then we'll talk about what we all do professionally and how we go about, the job of getting things done. So this is the video. This took place last Saturday here in the McKnight neighborhood in Springfield, Mass. All right, we'll try it again later. But that was a conflict. There's no volume on that video, so we'll try it again. But anyways, let's talk about accountability and what that means. Tara, in your capacity with the Pioneer Valley Project, PVP, let's talk about the work you do and how you go about getting that done. When we talk about, the plethora of issues that we deal with on a socio-political level.
Yeah, so I think the key word that you said was public, right? So the video that you just showed, was something that took place in the public arena. And so the work that we do in community organizing is also work that takes place in the public arena. So I think the thing that we have to always keep in mind is that those who are elected to represent us, they really want us as community members to behave as though we're trying to operate in the private arena, right? The way that we operate with our friends and family, the rules, right, that we use to operate in relationship to other people in the private arena. But elected office is about public accountability, right? And so there's a whole different set of rules in the public arena. And the truth is that elected officials rely on the community not knowing those rules, and their attempts to sort of move people into the rules of the private arena so that, they can even say, oh, that's not appropriate. That's not the place or the time to do what you did. That's not the right way. That's all about trying to confuse people in the community into thinking that really what we need to be doing is operating like we would at home with our family and friends. That's not true at all. This isn't about being liked. It's about accountability.
Absolutely. Is Hanif, let me ask you, is anybody off is anybody off limits when we talk about public accountability?
No, if you put yourself in a position of service, in a position of public office, then you're accountable to the public every minute of every day, every second of every day. You're accountable to them even while you're sleeping because you put yourself in a position to be elected and to serve. We're not talking about someone who runs a private business who is doing something for the sake of them and their one customer base. No, even that has a level of accountability to it. But when we talk about public office, the moment you get elected into public office, you are to be held accountable every day. And I like what Tara said. It's like it's like sometimes public officials want to make it so that you don't know the rules and they want to try to deflect and say, well, this is not the time or place. Well, the thing is if you don't ever make a time or a place for you to be held accountable, then you can't get mad when someone else makes it for you. And you can't serve in a public position without looking for accountability. If you're looking to not be held accountable, then public office is the wrong place for you, because your job as a public servant is to serve the best interest of the public. But in this country, like in many others, several public servants don't serve the best interest of the public. They serve the best interest of themselves, what their career goals are, what their goals are for grabbing power, both in the present time and in the future. So, you know what? If you don't like someone shouting you out in public and holding you accountable for things that are actual issues, then you shouldn't be where you are. We're not talking about someone who's sitting there saying, what are you going to do about those UFOs up there? No, we're talking about someone who's saying, here's a real issue. It's not getting addressed.
Right.
Here's a time I've tried to meet with you. You don't want to meet. I don't have to like your personality or the way you choose to do things, nor do I have to agree with your delivery if I'm in a public office. What I do need to do is make sure that I'm making myself available to be held accountable by the folks that put me in office, and even the ones that didn't put me in office that I still have to serve.
Right. I agree. Tara, in your capacity and in the work that you've done, I mean, I know when we talk about the anatomy of protest, typically when public officials are unresponsive, people have to protest to get their voice heard sometimes. And when you hear protest, people automatically think sit-ins and marching. But there are a number of different ways of protesting in terms of articulating your voice and speaking for the people that you represent. What are some of the ways you would suggest that people would go about, since people are always questioning what is the right way to do this? What exactly is the right way, and what does that mean?
Well, I mean, I think that is going to vary tremendously based on what your campaign looks like, right? And what the particular moment calls for. I mean, all of these tactics that we use, that sort of fall into the sort of big umbrella of protest. I mean, they range from everything from, doing an op-ed to physically, going someplace, to civil disobedience. I mean, there's a tremendous, to like call-in days, there's postcards, like there's all sorts of different ways that you can protest and basically use collective action to get your message across. And I think that, part of what activism, what we're seeing is that there's so many additional tactics that continue to emerge, right, as these movements move forward. And so, but I think, part of the key is that it's also, we're trying to get stuff accomplished. We're trying to create a change of some sort, but we're also always trying to figure out with how to move the public, right? So that the public can better understand and the public can better respond to what the call for justice is in that particular moment.
That makes sense. Okay. Thank you. Let me fix my camera here. All right. So it's kind of like, and I think this conversation is for the public, and we need them to know. For me, there are no limitations. If you can't get the response that you need, if he or she is sitting in a restaurant in public and they're having dinner, are they off limits? No. I remember times when I was working downtown at City Hall, and I can be in Walmart, and people would stop and they'd complain about their sidewalk. They'll talk about a tree in their yard. And the bottom line is, we're public service, which means we're supposed to sit there and we're supposed to listen. I don't know. I just think this is interesting. Hanif, I know you're not a Springfield resident, and I know, you have relations in here, you do work in here. It's just really interesting. We have a mayor who, over the course of 3 roundtable sessions in which he's supposed to address a Department of Justice report dealing with the police department, meetings with the Association of Black Business and Professional on another note, where they're supposed to address economic development opportunities for communities of color, meetings with folks dealing with housing issues for the homeless, for immigrant populations. It's so difficult getting him and others to actually sit down and have these conversations. So I just want to make sure that, by the end of this broadcast, that people understand that no matter who you are, what you are, no matter what stage of your development you may be in, everybody has a right and a privilege to hold your elected officials accountable for any service that you believe that they should be performing for you. You have to have your ducks in order, your I's dotted, your T's crossed. You need to know your business when you approach them. But these are things that we need to do. Hanif, you look like you're about to say something, so I'm going to let you get it off your chest. Say it.
Here's the thing about like this that really always rubs me the wrong way when it comes to some of these things. It's like some of these people, they campaign for your vote. They tell you how they're going to do things. They want your support, but they don't want your questioning. You're in the wrong business. I don't have to. Let me tell you something. When I look at the video that's sparking this conversation, if that was me, would I do the same thing that he did? I don't know. It depends on how many times I try to contact this man and he said no. Or it depends on if I feel like I'm not being heard or not. But here's what I do know. Whether you agree with how he did it or not, it's still his right to do it. And I think we live in a society today that says, no, we've got to come in this one particular way. And if we don't come in this one particular way, then it's out of order. No, what's equally out of order is lying. Because when you say to someone in a campaign, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and when you get in office, you have no intention of doing X, Y, and Z. You lied to me. If I was working for any other 9 to 5, I could be fired for that. And it wouldn't be, I got to serve my term first. No, I could be fired for that. If I was working for any other 9 to 5, when it comes to my annual evaluation, which in the case of some of these public servants is the voting booth, I wouldn't be able to keep my job. So, if people are going to sit in public office and don't want any level of accountability, then, don't be surprised when people don't support you, or don't be surprised if you get voted out. And if you don't like it, you're in the wrong business. I'm going to say it again. This is not a business that's about you. It's about serving other people. And if you can't look at what's best for the community you're supposed to be serving, then you're in the wrong place. Get out and make room for someone who will do right by the community.
Right. But is this message really directed to that elected official? I mean, most of the elected officials I've met are severe narcissists. So as far as they're concerned, it is a popularity contest. It is about their status. So their status. So some of them feel as if they're above the law. But what is the message to the people in terms of making sure that people understand that, they should feel empowered to hold these people accountable? Because most of us get the impression that, if you talk to your everyday guy, your neighbor, or the guy you see in Walmart, you see at the supermarket, they're like, yeah, I don't know what to do about the violence. I don't know what the city's doing. Well, what have you contacted them? People need to know, well, can I contact them? Yeah, you can contact them. How about have you contacted your city councilor? Contact your city councilor, your school committee member. Just getting people to the point where they feel empowered enough to address these issues and talk with folks about their concerns. Most people won't do it. And it's like, how do we get people to the point where there is no right time, no right place, and no right method? The bottom line is you do it and it's done. I'm just saying. So how do we get that message across to the community?
Well, it's the re-education process, because we said it once on the show already. People confuse the political process with voting. Voting is not the political process.
Right.
Voting is is making a decision as to who you think is going to be the best fit for a particular office. And people think, well, now I've done my civic duty, I've participated and I've voted and I've done my political duty. That's not political process. That is not what you do. That is voting. The political process is what you do before that vote, what you do after that vote. You know, I'll give you an example for where I live. So,
Okay.
you know, and earlier this year there was a motion for the Board of Education to change the school calendar next year. So instead of it saying Columbus Day, it would say Indigenous Peoples Day. Now, out of all the people on the board, there were a few people that objected to that, but there were two very strong objections to that. One of these people accused one of these people, who is the minority leader of the Republican Party in my town, accused the president of the Board of Education, who happens to be a Black man, of getting his facts about Columbus from Wikipedia, and said that he didn't know what he was talking about. I watched this meeting and I was livid. So what did I do? I wrote them all a letter. I said, you're supposed to be representing my children and what's best for their education. And since you're going to tell someone they got their education from Wikipedia, let me give you a history lesson. Let me cite some sources for you. Oh, by the way, I'm a college professor. Don't you dare tell me I got my education from Wikipedia either. And here's what's going to happen. If you can't do X, Y, and Z, then you're going to have someone challenging you for your seat in the next election.
Right.
That's engaging. I got responses. I wrote another response. It doesn't matter whether they like what I have to say or not. But the point is, the matter is that there's an engagement there. And now there's an awareness that somebody is watching. As long as your elected officials believe that you're not paying attention, they're going to do what they feel is in their best interest. But when they see you're paying attention, it's going to be a lot harder for them to continue to do what's in their best interest and your best interest, because once you start paying attention, then they know they can't pull the wool over your eyes anymore. And I think that's one of the things we have to re-educate our communities to let them know that voting is not the political process, that voting is an action that engages who will or who will not perform the service that they're supposed to be elected to perform. The political process is how we gather together, what we do on an individual basis, what we do on a collective basis. And it does not take, it doesn't have to take a whole gathering of people for the political process to be engaged. Each individual person in the community can engage in that process. And until we have that kind of re-education in our communities, we're going to continue to have politicians that are going to continue to pull the wool over people's eyes because the people themselves don't understand their role in the political process.
And can I add something to that? I mean,
Absolutely.
One thing that needs to be noted too is that they're just bringing back civics as a requirement in the curriculum in high schools, right? So let's not pretend like this isn't by design. There is a design to make sure that folks are not clear, young people, before they even have the chance to vote for the first time. And again, I mean, I think, piggybacking on what you said, Hanif, it's so true that there is this sense that voting that's the thing that creates democracy, right? It's democracy isn't one event, right? It's not the election. Democracy is the 24/7 between the elections, right? That where we do make those decisions to engage and hold our officials who are elected to be accountable to the people that they're supposed to serve, all the people that they're supposed to serve, right? And in a city like Springfield, where we have really low voter turnout, our city council attempted to send out mailings to increase awareness of an election, the last mayoral election, and it was vetoed by the mayor, right? So again, there are things that happen all the time, which over time have the impact of creating much less engaged, residents, and over time a much lower voter turnout, right? And so, we're talking about generations of young people who maybe got registered to vote when they were 18 in high school, but if not, their parents may not have gotten registered to vote in high school either, right? So we're also taking on something that's decades in the making.
And there's something I want to add to what you just said too. I mean, we talk about, when we talk about civics being removed from the educational process, even the civics, like if you look in Florida, I don't know if any of you have seen this, but I read an article recently about the reintroduction of civics education in Florida. And the governor has said in Florida that the re-education of civics education will not include anything about protesting, will not include anything about racism and in politics and how racism has impacted civics. It'll only talk about good, wholesome values that will keep people in line with the value of the state and the value of the nation. No, if we're going to translate that, what that's going to say is we only want people engaging in civics that are going to toe my party line. And that's absolute bullshit, period. And when we talk about like the lack of civic engagement, we've been conditioned to believe that we as the people don't have power and that the government is like this big entity that has all the power. The government is made up of people. So when we start talking about what government should be doing, we have to reframe that and remind ourselves that the government isn't a huge entity, nameless entity. It is made up of men and women who are doing jobs. And if they're not doing their jobs correctly, like one of the things that people saw in California, and I think people forget this. I mean, each state constitution varies when it comes to this. But when Arnold Schwarzenegger was elected as governor of California the first time, I don't think people were aware that that was a special election because the people were so pissed with the governor. They researched their constitution and forced an election in the middle of his term. A lot of state constitutions have provisions for things like that. Do you think any of these politicians want us to know that? Heck no. Because if we come to realize the amount of power we actually wield when it comes to their jobs, now they would definitely have to be held accountable more to the people and less to the donors, more to the people and less to their own personal agenda, more to the people and less to their own political aspiration. I mean, look at the whole thing we see with what we saw with the insurrection. Look at how many people voted against certifying the election in contested states, even though the Republican-controlled legislatures in those states said there was nothing wrong with the election. It doesn't matter because these people were setting up their future political aspirations because they know the people in their home states don't know how to hold them accountable. So in addition to what we have to do in terms of getting people to the polls and getting people to write on a regular basis, knocking on doors, going into the offices, making the complaints heard to these elected officials, we also need people who know how to research into our state constitutions, who know how to dig in and say, well, can I force a special election if this person isn't doing a satisfactory job? I can. I need this many thousand signatures sent to whom? Oh, I really can do that. See, now you'll start seeing some things start moving and turning. But until we start understanding not just the generic rules of the game, but the specific points that are kept away from us, we won't have the amount of power that we really do have. And as long as we're ignorant of what's possible, we won't mobilize to do what we can do. So I think there's a lot of pieces that need to be put together for us to take back our power from these public servants that have basically usurped it due to our own ignorance of the process.
Yeah, and I think, go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead, Tara. We're here to hear you guys.
So, I also think that, that speaks to just how important when we're talking about what it takes to run a movement, what it takes to actually build collective power. I mean, we're also talking about a narrative fight here, right? And so there is a sense. So when you have moments like what you had on the video of last Saturday, right? I think the mayor's, or any elected official's sense is like, oh, I can easily make this into the statement about, well, that's not the right place and that's not the right time. So I think, when we're talking about what is it going to take, what kind of tactics do we need to be keeping in mind and what's off limits and what's not? I mean, I also agree that nothing's off limits, right? Because, I think what Charles Stokes decided to do on that day was a reflection of, the actual, lived experiences of members of our community, which are not being addressed in a systemic way by those who represent, the mayor, or maybe it's city councilors or whoever it is. But in this case, it was focused on the mayor. If people's experiences were being, heard, respected, and addressed, then that kind of interaction might not have ever needed to happen because there was dialogue. But because of a lack of accountability, on the part of our mayor in this case, frustration builds over time. This mayor has made a choice to be absent and refuse to engage with people except for on his terms. Specifically on the issue of violence and the issue of the need for police reform and police accountability. And so, we're also in a narrative battle too here as the community, right? And so, and we don't have the resources, the same resources that, an elected official may have, but that's something that we have to keep in mind too, so that we can also shape the narrative around what we want the world to look like.
And Tara, I'm glad you talked about narrative. I was going to ask my next question. On one hand, you have the elected officials, in this case, say the mayor of the city of Springfield. On the second hand, you have the media, which pretty much supports the majority of mainstream elected officials, especially when they're talking about, impoverished communities and communities of color. You will never get the vantage point when it comes down to the narrative, unless, of course, they have something to gain by it. So how do we counter that? And then when you talked about the resources, what are some of the resources you think we need to add to the arsenal to make sure that, we can get the clear message out to the community, period, and educate the general public at large, anybody. And I also want to take a minute to introduce Ty Allen. Oh, did I freeze up?
I'm not.
Okay. Tara, I think you froze up on us. All right. I think Tara froze up on us. So, Ty, I'm going to go to you. Can you guys hear Tara?
No, I can't. She's frozen.
Okay. All right. So we'll come back to Tara once she comes back on. Ty, do you want to introduce yourself? I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
So we have Ty Allen on with us. Hanif, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Ty. You're really low.
All right.
How's that?
That's better.
How's that? All right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, honey. Hey, D.
Hey.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ty Allen. I am an artist, poet, /singer, /creative director. And sometimes on weekends and holidays, I play a strategist, activist for a lot of progressive politicians and CBOs across this great nation of ours, even sometimes in Europe and Africa. I heard Tyra Hanif talking and got me thinking that there's a conversation we don't like to have in America, that there is a political elite that doesn't realize they're not really elite. What they're really trying to do is sucker up to the oligarchical aspects of our community, the folks with money, the 1%, the 2%, the 5% who actually have most of the assets of this nation. And the political elite are, as Hanif pointed out earlier, I think Charlie kind of mentioned as well, they're making decisions on how they can get more gain. And when you're making decisions from that level down, you forget that there is legislation to be made. I've been saying for a while, anyone who has ever been advised by me, the first thing I tell them is that legislation is supposed to be for 3 reasons: to provide, to prevent, are the first two. Those are the first two most important: provide and prevent. And the other one is to predict. The last one is the hardest, of course, because you're kind of guesstimating. But provide is the financial outlays, the ways and means. The prevent is to stop things from hurting others. And to predict is really to kind of sit down and figure out with the communities that you're working with how to make things better. But when you're coming from a standpoint of the political elite, you do the minimum amount of each of those because you want to keep getting gain. And that gain often hurts us. It's why the mayor of Springfield is just as whack as the mayor of Yonkers. The mayor of Yonkers is just as inept as the mayor of Brooklyn. Then you have a mayor like the one in Baltimore who's trying to get things done. He's pushing against that oligarchy and that elite, and you see that he's upset, but he's pushing ahead. We need more people who think how Tyrant and Hanif think, how we can make this work for everyone. Now, mind you, I have nothing against the rich because I did not grow up poor. I'd be a liar like I did. But my parents are very clear that the money is transient, the community is more important, and how we can get people to start thinking this way. Because it's not even capitalism. Because that's a lie. Capitalism at its purest form from Adam Smith is about building your state to be the best, I can't curse, the best freaking state. But to do that, how that is identified as being successful is when the rich and powerful help to challenge communities rise. It's written in what he says. It's written in the book, the actual book that we all pull capitalism from. He says this, the whole section about how capitalism, he doesn't use that word, obviously, how what the theory of capitalism is about making sure that your state wins. Other states can lose, but your community is supposed to win. And a great identifier is how you make pathways and advances for those who are challenged, poor, and working. That's not what capitalism is in America. It's not what capitalism is in Western Europe. It is not the imperialistic aspects and colonial aspects of capitalism across the globe, what we now call third world nations. It is predatory capitalism. It's not capitalism. It's just oligarchy with a pretty name. And until we start to see the world in that way, we're going to constantly send people to Washington, to Springfield, to Boston, to Albany, who come in with great intentions, but there are no accountability or auditing systems to keep them that way. We're going to send people to these places who are going to be seduced by the money and seduced by the power. When they realize the power is the actual money they gain from higher and better sources, then we lose them to the political elite. And that's why you hear people have conversations like, why is Dow running? Because Dow's not part of the system. Why does Hanif think he can be mayor? Hanif then comes through the system. The system is what the problem is. Even the people who create this nation, the white men that we don't like because of slavery, they made a system that actually works. And but they saw early on how political parties and the oligarchy was causing problems, which is why Alexander Hamilton's dead, or was killed, I should say, or murdered. Aaron Burr is part of that problem. And until we start to really recognize these things, what they really are, what white supremacy at its nicest is not just about racism. It's about control. It's about economics. It's about predictive power. It's about expanding that predictive power to control your nation, the people within your nation, and across other nations in a way that looks like it's gentle and kind. It's racism on brown and black people. It's xenophobia on whatever new culture or country is immigrating in. It's about controlling white people who don't understand that they are using you as moats between the racism and power just so they can keep making money. It's classism under a different name. It is feudalism under a different name. It is oligarchy. And none of us are falling from the okie doke, including myself. And hopefully we'll start to see a difference as we move on. Or not. I'm hoping that we will. That's what we're doing right now in New York, especially Indiana and North Carolina, trying to move this in a different way so we can do some different things and really build a community that's dope. Because on deck, being black in America requires that we also are being white in America, Asian in America, Latino in America, because all the coaches need to realize that the oligarchy aspect, the white supremacy aspect is bigger than our simple fuse between ourselves. And that's my soapbox for today.
All right. Thank you, Ty. Tyra, before we got disconnected, thanks, Ty. You look like you were like wound up to like you were ready to let go, and then when it went out,
you about to kick ass. So obvious.
I was getting stressed out because I couldn't see what was happening. So I don't even know what the last question was before.
The last question was, you had mentioned something about narrative. You talked about elected officials. You said they have the resources, and then there's this thing about narrative. And I just wanted you to expound a little bit more about the narrative part in terms of, what that narrative, define, talk about narrative, and then talk about the different ways that the community can counter the narrative.
Right. Well, I mean, I think we counter the narrative by taking the narrative into our own hands. I mean, I think the show is a great example of, reclaiming the space to create our own narrative. Right. And so I think it's not, when we talk about mainstream conventional media, we have to just, you know, it's there, it exists, it's going to continue to exist for, you know, a while longer. You know, it's corporate, it's all driven by, I mean, you know, we've got this strange conglomerate here in Springfield with 3 networks that are owned by the same company, which,
Right.
you know, is bizarre. So I think, you know, I think we let go of the need to rely solely on those types of channels, right? And we create narrative by communicating with the community, you know, using channels like this, right? It's like we have to, you know, we have to be talking with people, talking with each other where people are talking, right? And that's not on channel 22, right? It's you know, it's right here. And so whether it's you know, just doing, I mean, I just feel like there's so much more that we need to be doing with mediums like this in order to continue to drive a narrative. And it's, you know, driving the narrative is part educating people about what's going on, right? And it's also part conversation and sort of deconstructing the mythology around what the dominant narrative keeps telling us, right? Which is, do it this way, don't do it this way. That's acceptable, that's not acceptable. Accountability really means this, but it really means this, right? And so I think we have to, I mean, I know it's really agitational for me as an organizer, you know, to know that we aren't using this stuff enough, even though we feel like we're using it more. We have to communicate in the community, you know, in the ways that people are communicating.
Absolutely.
You know, there's something else I want to add to that. I mean, I think when we start talking about like controlling the narrative, I think one of the things that we have to really start looking at and identifying is that, you know, the narrative doesn't just start with what's in the media. You know, the narrative starts at before it even gets there. You know, we have to look at what's the narrative that's being taught, you know, to our children in schools. What's the narrative that's being spoken about in our communities? You know, the barbershop used to be a place in which, you know, you didn't just go to get a haircut. You found out about what was going on in the community. Some people gossiped, they joked around and talked about sports, but that was also a place where the narrative was shaped in the community. You know, we've got to look at where the narrative, we got to look at what feeds into the narrative, because we can have as many of these media channels like on deck, and we can have as many things like the Metro Record and all these different sources that we want. But if what's feeding into those narratives isn't looked at and corrected at the same time, and this is why I say this a lot, is that we all have to realize what our role is. We all have to realize that, like, we don't have to come from, you know, the same space in order to help reshape the narrative, but we have to look at the spaces we occupy and how can we help contribute to the reshaping of the narrative. You know, it's like where, like in my history class, like the way I teach jazz history is a lot of what I talk about with jazz history is I'll parallel it with whether it's a social movement that was going on, whether it was an issue of classism or sexism or racism, and talk about a lot of these different things, because to me, you can't divorce the two. But you know what? That's also reshaping the narrative as to what jazz is and what jazz isn't. See, so like we have to look at everything that feeds into the narrative, and we have to make sure that we have people in places at all of those sources so that everyone is doing their part, so that by the time it gets to a forum like this, you have people that are becoming re-educated on what the narrative really is versus what it's presented to be.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, the other piece of this is that if, you know, as Hanif said, if folks don't come to something like this with their own analysis, then that's another part of shaping the narrative, right? And so if whether it's, you know, the way the arts are shaping the narrative, the way that music is shaping the narrative, the way that the traditional education system shapes the narrative, you know, we're not creating critical thinking humans who are in a position so that they have an analysis of, I mean, we all have an analysis based on our life experience, but we're also,
but we actually never do. We actually never do. We've never in the history of mankind created a community of critical thinking, a majority critical thinkers. It's never happened. And the idea that we think we can is actually false. It's false on our part. What we might want to do, and maybe we can one day, but before we get to that point, and that takes 100 years, and we evolve. Well, Daryl might be around. He's already Methuselah. But besides Daryl being around because he's already old, what we might want to start doing is giving space to people like Tara and Hanif to have a larger audience. Because then now we can see, because we have been for a long time giving adulation to the fuck ups. Let's start giving adulation to Tara and Hanif. Let's give space of 1 million people to Daryl Moss and his mechanism and organ, rather than giving space and nonsense to the nonsense. Because now the masses will start to follow what is acceptable beauty and acceptable commercial. I want to find a good word for this. Commercial abundance. Let's make Daryl Moss, Hanif, and Tara commercial. So now we can drag them kicking and screaming, or we can drag them and say, "Here, we are now the objects of your thinking." I just want to balance.
But the only problem with that is we start building on personality as opposed to process. I think where they were going.
But you have to first, Daryl, because right now the American process actually works. What destroys it are the personalities. It really actually works. The idea of innocent before guilty works, except you have DAs and cops who lie. The idea of voting to create amendments and legislation and Bill of Rights to expand and contract them upon need works, except you have a Trump and a Nixon come along. If you can remove, if we can have more people who think like the three of you on the side of my screen, we'd have less of the nonsense of these people.
Right.
The system's not actually
tied. But and that's the premise of the conversation in terms of finding ways to remind people that they have the power to create change. So I hear what you're saying. I think it really ties in along. It really supports what everybody's already saying. Except I hear the national, what you're talking about in terms of looking at it from a national view, but from a local perspective, it's kind of like things aren't perfect and the process isn't exactly working for everybody.
Because personalities interrupt that. And we can't fool ourselves thinking that at any point in our lifetime we can get the majority to start moving analysis. We have to be. And it's not disrespectful. Anyone seeing it take it this way, whatever. I've been called worse. It takes people like us to do the analysis and make the noise. Because the processes actually do work. If it didn't work, the three of us could not talk to Tara. Period. We'd be dead. The system didn't have some kind of work, this conversation would not be able to have, because we would not be able to talk to a white woman at all. But because of processes that do work, like amendments, like legislation, like executive orders, that we've been able to move into places where we can have this kind of conversation and think in this way. So now we have to start giving people like you way more audience. So we can start swaying folks and they can see that what you're saying is viable. Because the viability of an ABC is going to always push you out the way because they have more money, they have more power, they have more bandwidth. The more bandwidth we give to Tara, Hanif, and you, the more people start to see that what we're saying is not crazy and actually doable. Think about the fact that I can walk into most space. I sold at the Apollo 4 times. That alone has gotten me more space than the fact that I'm educated and I know how to string words together. No one cares. When they introduce me, they don't go, "Oh my God, he's taught at Pratt." They go, "Oh my God, he performed at the Apollo. It's a political rally. Who cares? I did the Apollo. No one cares. We're talking about agenda, and they're talking about the Apollo.
Right?
Fucking Apollo. I'm not going to sing a song right now, a poem. I'm talking about these things trying to get past, and the conversation is about me selling out the Apollo and BAM.
Yeah,
because that's what they see as the thing in time.
You being performing at the Apollo isn't going to stop police brutality. It's not going to get the mayor of any medium-sized city in the country to do due diligence, meet with the people he's supposed to meet with, talk with the folks he's supposed to. It's not going to happen. So you're absolutely right. I got you.
Right. But then the work that I do on the ground, cops almost shot me twice last year on the BLM thing. That stuff they don't talk about. But the work that we're doing around that I know that I can tell already that Tara, I know Hanif's already doing, that's the work. But we need to get Tara. I want Tara on Good Morning America. That's what I want to see. I want to see that happening. I want that conversation. I want Hanif on 2020. I want that conversation to happen. That's
We
why
do.
I don't like Charlemagne the God as a person. I think he's a dick. But one thing I do like about him, he will give Hanif and Tara space to talk. And that right there is powerful. He's a jerk, but he knows that his platform can open up for people who have something to say. And I think that's what we need, more folks who think like that.
That's cool. But tell me how that impact right now.
I know what you're going to ask as you freeze. In New York, for example, the pressure we put through artists, through activists, and through legislation has allowed us to actually make a culture change in the NYPD that would not have been possible 2 years ago. It's happening. It's literally happening. I'm in the room testifying. I'm doing the backdoor negotiations. We're seeing it happening. Of the 15 bills, 13 have passed already. So it was the artists, the kids in the street, us in the back rooms, and all these famous folks who jumped down the back of the police. And we got 15 reforms that from the power of the independent bureau to actually investigate and discipline. The mayor not only can choose the commissioner, but then he has to go through a vetting process like you do with the cabinet members in the federal government. That never would have happened 2 years ago. And you know I've been on the ground doing this for what? How old are we now? 27, you and I? So since we were 7 years old, I've been doing this. And now, because of the pressure of all three things, the streets, the artists, and the influencers, and the government, we're going to get some change. We're going to actually move money from the police into social service programs. We're about to actually, if this goes well, I might be playing myself saying this on live, but no one in New York can see this anyway. We're going to have a real bill that interrupts the AI for human resources that can now won't be just because the AI and human resources is built by somebody with a bias, same way that those monitoring things don't pick up black skin because they were made by some white men or even women for that matter, white or black. We're going to actually affect that to make those biases scrubbed out. So getting a job can actually be about meritocracy. And that's because we put pressure from the artists, the streets, and the legislature. And now more people like us are getting in and they're finding inroads into the power bases. So we need more of that. And we need more media, because the more media we get, the more we can actually get things done. I totally believe that.
All right. So let me move over to Tara Hanif. Anybody want to comment on?
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, I think to Ty's point, one of the things that I definitely will agree with that is that, there are people that will not get to a level of critical thinking because either they don't want to, number one, or number two, they're so concerned with how am I going to put food on this table when I don't make enough money to pay rent, do food and all this other stuff, that they don't have time to even think about something critically. So when you have someone that's kind of in a position to be able to say, all right, here's what's going on. This is what we need to do. This is why we need to do it. And it's a different voice than a regular establishment voice. It kind of gives some momentum to people who may not normally have time to think about it. That being said, I also think, because I can't help but think this way as an educator, that, we also have a responsibility as grown-ass people in this country to become as informed as possible to the things that are bothering us. And if we choose not to do that for whatever reason or for whatever circumstances, then that's on us. We in my opinion, and I specifically say my opinion, when you choose not to become informed about something, you start losing the credibility of your complaint. You don't have that same level of credibility when you're just moaning about something that you don't really know nothing about, that you haven't even bothered to look into just because of whatever reason, case, or form. The more people that we have that can think critically, I think the better off we're going to be. But until we can get to that point, I think we also need to look at the lanes we can take advantage of. I mean,
I agree. I hear what you and Ty are saying. I agree and I disagree at the same time. And Ty, I'm gonna tell you why. You know what? When I do my dinner and dialogue, it's all about creating an educational forum so that I can educate as many people as possible on as many subjects as possible. If I take all my time and I focus on just a few personalities and push them forward so that they can get a spotlight, what happens to the people back in the neighborhood? They don't get that information. No, let me finish. You're doing a false equivalency, though. Let me finish. Ty, let me finish.
I can't allow false supremacy.
We've had social movements in which a personality would go to the top. They're on all the major talk shows. They're doing everything. But the minute you remove that personality from the process, we go back to stage one all over again.
You're doing false equivalency. I'm not suggesting one over the other. What I'm suggesting is looking at the history of mankind. We can play the game of what I wish utopia looks like, or we can play the game of what actually does happen. What actually does happen is that a personality or personalities.
But Ty, we need it. Here's the thing. What you're saying sounds great in theory.
I'm asking you a question.
But I didn't ask a question. But in terms of practical application,
I'm going to answer.
What are you telling the people in the neighborhoods?
I'm going to answer.
Telling them don't worry about it. It's always been like that since the beginning of time.
You're doing false equivalency.
Understand this. Help me to understand.
You're doing false equivalency again. I'm not suggesting that one.
What?
You're doing false equivalency. I'm not suggesting one, and you're also creating a disparity. I'm not saying. So in both those cases, I'm not suggesting that we down one for the other. I'm saying that we look at what makes the things work. Leninism worked because a few people convinced a lot of people to follow them. That's why it worked. It wasn't that the guy who held the guns and shot the howitzer and that killed the royal family. That motherfucker didn't understand how the machines of economics versus the working rights. He didn't understand that. Well, he understood that if I help Lenin win, I'm going to get some potatoes in my pot. He was convinced of that. So what has to happen is that we need people like us to build the process. We need us to use our personalities to build processes that makes the person who wants to hold the gun and hold the hammer believe that we have them on their set. You can't just do a personality. I'm not suggesting that, but the personality has to be there. The Jackson 5 worked because there's a guy in front who was dope, but then they had a band behind them who all understood their harmonies and what their positions were. So when you had the combination, you can't have one over the other. A charismatic leadership only works for a period of time. You're right. When the charisma is gone, the leadership falls apart. For a charismatic leadership that builds process, then you have something. You have to have both. You can't just say one or the other. And if anyone thinks I'm saying that, then I apologize and I didn't do that properly. I'm not saying that. You have to have somebody fly to convince everyone else, like Tariq Hanif, to go, yo, there's a different way. You may not understand all of it, but let's build this way, and let's build some people who can and not just build people to do the job, build people who are accountable and can be audited and love the people. That's the most important thing. Those three things: love for the people and community, or can be held accountable / co-govern, and then any co-governors are willing to be audited, because when you fuck up, you fuck up. Doesn't mean you're the devil, but you made a mistake. So we have to have all those three things have to happen. And that's what I'm saying. You can't. I'm not saying one or the other, cousin. You can't do one. Okay. That's not going to work. Okay. And then you get Trump.
Okay. I got your point. I got it, cousin. Terry, you look like you want to say something. Say something.
Well, I mean, the truth is that going back to what Ty mentioned, is that it's going to take lots of different types of folks to build any sort of movement. Right? It's going to be some people who have charisma, and it's going to be some people who will knock on doors. It's going to be some people who can communicate it via social media, right? It's going to be some people who have space, who are influential in some way, right? And so I think part of our analysis as folks who want to reimagine the way things look in our society is that we've got to build relationships across all of those spaces, right? So that we can begin to infiltrate the narrative, the dominant narrative, in ways that's gonna make things happen. And I mean, I think it takes tactics like what Charles Stokes did. It takes all of it in order to remind people of the lie, right? This is a lie. It's a lie the way that, that the mayor of Springfield is declaring how committed he is to the safety of a community, when he's only committed to the safety of particular communities, not all communities, right? It's a lie. So it takes people saying it's a lie in lots of different ways, right? And so that's why I think, and again, going back to this notion of when is it the right time? It's always the right time to tell the truth. It's always the right time. And the truth is not pretty, but it's always the right time to tell the truth.
You know, that brings me to an interesting point of discussion when we talk about the truth. And, you know, we hear this in less in politics, but we also hear this a lot of other places. And that's this notion of, you know, I have my truth and you have your truth. Bullshit. Truth is truth. If you what my truth is an opinion that you don't want challenged. So what we see a lot, especially when it comes to political officials, is they like to say, well, you know, you don't have all of the facts. Well, I've been trying to get all the facts, but you haven't been meeting with me. So what are you gonna say? You know, if you're not providing me with what I need to have a complete picture, then how do I know that what you're saying is actually correct? Like the idea that I shouldn't be held accountable because I'm the mayor. I mean, that's absolute garbage. The idea that, you know, my mom used to say this, you know, my mom used to say, you know, I will trust more of what you do than what you say, because you can say a whole lot. That doesn't mean you're going to actually do it. So if you're saying all the right words, but your actions show the opposite, why am I going to trust a word out of your mouth to begin with? And when you're in a position of political leadership where your job is the safety, the security, the well-being, the welfare, the economic development, and empowerment, because let's not confuse development and empowerment, because they're not always necessarily the same thing, of a whole city full of people. And you're not doing that job for this whole city. You're only doing it for like 2 or 3 neighborhoods. You're damn right you're going to be held accountable. And if I'm living in one of those neighborhoods you're not doing something for and you're not giving answers to, and the only time you show up is if it's for a photo op that makes you look good and I confront you, I have every right to confront you. I don't care whether you like how I did it. I don't care whether you agree with how I did it. I have every right as a citizen of said city to confront you. Now, that being said, you know, I think also sometimes, and I shudder to say this, but I'm going to say it. Sometimes, no matter how much you want to be an anti-establishment person, you have to learn how to play the game so that your anti-establishment works to your benefit. Because when you don't know how the game works and you want to be this anti-establishment figure, you can be easily spun into someone who just doesn't care about the community and is being selfish. You can be easily spun into something that you're not. Knowing how to play the game does not mean knowing how the game works to play it, or that you have to play it the way they're playing you. But knowing how it works allows you to have the most effective strategy to not only get your point across, but to get your agenda passed. And we've spent a lot of time like trying to build this. Well, let me rephrase that. Some of us have spent a lot of time trying to build an anti-establishment kind of rhetoric that we forget that there's a way to make it work. And whether you agree or disagree, it doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree at this point, you know, with the way, and in this case, I'm gonna be specific. When we talk about Stokes and what he did and what's on that video, whether people agree with him or not, you know, that's irrelevant. He brought up some points that not a single person tried to address. Why? If the man is so wrong, then why couldn't you address what he had to say? See, because that's what you do. If someone is coming out there and they're shouting and they're screaming and they're wrong, then you calmly address the points and show them and show people how they're wrong. To me, what spoke more volumes to me with that clip was the fact that instead of addressing what was being said, it became a shouting match. And the mayor talking about, you know, sometimes, you know, I try to be nice, but sometimes, you know, you got to put these people in their place. Put what people in their place? You know, but like I said, there's a whole process to this. And everyone has to understand how the process works to best play their role, however which way they choose. But when you put yourself in a position where someone who has the power and has control of the narrative can spin you in another way, then you fall into the trap because you don't know how to play the game.
I agree with that totally. Put that whole thing on a t-shirt, Daryl. And, you know, it's funny because I'm hearing this conversation, and because of the way the world is now, or the way the world is generally. You mentioned earlier about how movements in jazz, right? I did this white paper for the public library in Brooklyn, and we turned into a performance where I noticed every movement that happened in music happened in poetry, particularly poetry. And we couldn't figure out what was the relationship between the poets and the musicians. It was interesting, but and every revolution that happened in music and poetry happened in community development, social justice, or politics for Black people. We still couldn't figure out. We still have not figured out what's the conjunction of the social justice and politics, the poet particularly, and the musician. But somehow the three of them always show up at the same time. And the one thing why I mention that, the one thing that's really interesting about it is that the truth around why they're there, no one really knows. But you can sit here for hours and give your true opinion. But the fact is, these things always happen. And what we rarely ever do in politics is stop and ask, what are the facts of the problems? To do that requires asking the people who are being affected. At some point, we have to start going, rather than me coming into a community going, hey, you guys need paper towels. They might want cheesecloth. we don't know what they want. If I ask them, they may tell me they want toilet paper instead. They may need Clorox wipes, or they might need water, like little good old fashioned water. And when we start to ask the questions, do you think, I can help with it?
No, finish your thought. Todd, finish your thought, and then I'll bring up the question.
When you start to ask the question, and I think Hanif and Tara kind of touched on this, you start to see why the truth and the facts sometimes become a little closer together. That's what co-governance was supposed to be, or is supposed to be. You go to the experts in that community and ask them, what makes sanitation better? What are points around public safety? And then combined to that, something that my man Dasan Ahanu, who former fellow at Harvard, and I once talked about, we're over artists being asked to come in and save the problems. Ask us before you start. And I want to expand that to say, ask the communities you want to affect before you start making rules, start passing laws, start telling them what the police that they need, the school that they want to have. Why don't you ask us and ask us in a way that is really about co-governance and really about being helpful? And then I think we will find, Hanif, a closer connection between the truth and the facts. I really believe that in my heart of hearts.
Okay. Thank you, sir. And then the question for all three of you, do you think that being termed an anti-establishment activist is helpful to address particular issues? Doesn't it sound like contrarianism, which makes any stance easy to dismiss? What do you guys think about that in terms of being labeled an anti-establishment activist?
Well, since I brought it up, I'll start.
Go for
it. It largely depends on how you're approaching what you do. Okay. If you're approaching this in a way that I'm just going to wreck everything because no one's listening, and you don't understand how the game works, because this is, like it or not, it's a game. And if you don't understand how this works, then it becomes very disruptive, and it becomes a place where you're doing more harm to what you're fighting for than you're doing good. If you understand how the game works and understand there's a time and place in which disruptions like the one we saw on last weekend on the news, there's a time and place when those disruptions are done strategically in that right moment, where it does 1,000% more than coming to and having a kumbaya discussion around a round table, with some food and some drinks. It's about understanding when to do what and why. Ty kind of was picking on something that I teach some of my improvisational students, and I talk to them. I say, learning harmony and chords and rhythms and transcribing solos. That's the what, that's the how. But if you don't understand the why, you're never going to make authentic music. In the same respect, when you talk about an anti-establishment activist, if you don't understand why you need to be anti-establishment and when you need to be anti-establishment, you will cause more harm to your cause than you will do good. But if you understand why you need to be, and you understand when you need to be, and understand that being anti-establishment doesn't mean that I've got to come and wreck shop and be the most disruptive. Because Malcolm was Malcolm X was one of the largest anti-establishment activists that I've ever seen, but he was very effective. He knew when to do what, and he knew why he was doing it. And I think when we want to play these kind of roles, like Malcolm did, we need to understand that if you don't understand why you're doing this, what to do, and when to do it, man, you're not being like Malcolm. You just being a caricature at best. So like it all depends on how you're doing it, and it all depends on if you understand why you're doing it.
Okay, Tara, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, I also think that when we talk about accountability, we have to apply that in our own work in the community, right? So, part of it, my reaction to, the concept of an anti-establishment, getting labeled an anti-establishment activist, I mean, it's a tactic that the dominant narrative uses, right, to discredit all the time. So some of that I just kind of go, this is what they do. But I mean, to what Hanif said, I think any leader who sees himself as a voice in this movement, I think their proximity to the folks that are impacted by the demand that is being made, that person's proximity to those people makes a big difference, and their accountability to the communities that they're speaking for, right? So I do think that, there are folks in the community that can do a lot of damage because they too are not accountable. So, I always, when we're talking to our members and, really strengthening leadership skills, we're always focused on accountability because we are accountable to each other, right? If we're trying to recreate a world that where white supremacy doesn't rule the day, then if we're reproducing parts of white supremacy in our tactics, then we're not being accountable, right? So I think that, one, being anti-establishment is fine, but without an analysis of the why, like Hanif said, I think that's harmful. Without proximity to the people in the community who are impacted by what you're doing, that's also really problematic. And I've seen, things go the wrong way sometimes when folks in the community, sort of present themselves as representing the community. Who do you have behind you, right? That's not to say that there aren't moments where tactically it's the right thing to do. I think, like Hanif said, there are moments when doing what happened last weekend is going to make a huge impact in the direction you want to take things in the community. But, who are people checking in with before they make those kinds of decisions, right? That's what I always think about.
Okay. Tara, you want to take a stab at that? Thank you, Tara. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yes, no, sir. I'm actually, I want to, I was looking for the Zoom button where you press like a thumbs up and a clapping thing for both of them. I think they explained exactly what was in my head.
Okay. Thank you. All right, I'm going to read one more comment, then I'm going to ask for closing thoughts. Big Halisi Moel says accountability or being held accountable at any time is never wrong. The first thing out of Sano's mouth was, I'm tired of the disrespect. Not one thing to the questions raised.
Can I go first on that one?
I'm sorry?
Can I go first on that one?
Yeah, go for it.
So I had no idea what Sano did. And I don't even know what the topic is actually about. But the funny thing is that is the first thing an ego in control will use when they are put against the wall. Cats will scratch, dogs will bark, liars and egotists in control will tell you that they're being disrespected. It is a tool that is the Batman. What's the Batman? What's the belt? The belt called again? The utility belt. It's the first thing on the utility belt that a liar or egotist in power will grab. I don't even know what he did. Doesn't even matter what he did. I don't even know what the protest was about. Your town's about this big, so I don't know what actually happened in the actual town. So, but I do know that whatever it was, whatever he's talking about, It is always the response of those who are in control who don't want to be audited and held accountable. And people who don't believe in co-governance are in control, that is what they fall on. They want to make us look like we are interlopers to a process, when the actual process from that slave master old Jefferson on down has been, when we don't like something, is to say something. It's one of the first things they wrote. The Declaration of Independence is a Dear John letter, yo. That's what the damn thing is. It's a Dear John letter. It's a Dear George letter. It's a Dear George letter. And so if you're going to act like you're part of the process, but then deny the process started with someone going, I don't like this, then you are a motherfucking liar who failed social studies. And you don't understand why we're actually here.
Absolutely.
So I know that for a fact.
You know what? You don't have to see it to understand it. You got it. And that was pretty much it. So
Wait, I don't want to leave this yet. I want to leave this.
All right.
Here's my problem with that also. You're tired of the disrespects, the first thing that comes out of your mouth. Well, how disrespectful is it that you haven't addressed the concerns and how many years you've been in administration? How disrespectful is it to the people whose families have lost people due to violence, and there's unsolved murders, and that hasn't been dealt with? How disrespectful is it to take a Justice Department report and have your commissioner say that everything is all good when the FBI says, no, it's not? How disrespectful is it to continually tell portions of your community you're going to do what you're supposed to do for them? You do what you're supposed to do for them, but for the majority of them, you don't care nothing about them until it's time to get reelected. That's disrespectful. If you don't like the way another man comes at you, sure, the manner in which he could be doing it could be considered disrespectful to you, but he wouldn't have had to do it if you actually respected the community you're supposed to be serving. So if you want to stop being disrespected by people in moments like this, do your job. Serve the entire community. That doesn't mean you can make everyone happy. It's not possible. But if you're addressing the concerns and it's transparent and it's real, you would never have a need to be disrespected at a photo op, is really what it comes down to be. Yeah. So if you don't want to be disrespected in the way that you felt you were disrespected, do your job. If you don't want to do your job, then get out. It's that simple. That's disrespect is not addressing what has been plaguing the place you're in charge of governing and keeping it that way for how many years? That's disrespectful. I don't even live in Springfield, and it pisses me off to hear him say, I was disrespected when you haven't done anything, even when I was living over there. So to me, what you have not been doing that's supposed to be done is a sign of disrespect to the thousands of people that live in that community and are still having the same problems that they had on day one of your administration. So you don't want people coming at you with disrespect. Actually respect them first.
Well, damn, anything else you want to add?
No, you don't want me to go on right now.
All right. Before we close off, Tara, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that this goes back to what someone like a Sarno or any elected official wants to do at all turns, at all costs, which is discredit the community when they don't align themselves with their narrative, right? And so that particular time it was Charles. Another time it's PVP. Another time, it's always going to happen that way. And our work is to name the lie over and over and over again in all the spaces. Name the lie, and basically, I mean, nothing is going to change just because we want it to. We have to be strategic. We have to be, relentless. And we've got to be able to help people see, because they see already, but they don't really see a way to make the change. We've got to help people see how to make the change. And that is, that democracy is happening between the election cycles, not just on the day that we vote. And that accountability can happen anytime, any place, because that's what they signed up for.
All right. Thank you. All right, I want to thank all three of you Hanif, you are regular. You're always with us. My co-moderator. Ty, Tara, thank you so much for joining us. At the end of every broadcast, we ask folks to just kind of share their closing thoughts with the general public, things you want them to know. If you have a means for them to contact you, if they want to be a part of something that you're doing, please share that now. This broadcast will play about 20 more times by next Friday. And next Sunday, we'll be back on at 3 o'clock. And Hanif, correct me if I'm wrong, we'll be doing a part 2 on our conversation on education, correct?
Correct.
All right. So we'll go closing thoughts. We'll go with ladies first. This is Parrish. We'll start with you.
Well, I think that this last year has, I think, revealed so many things in Springfield in particular around how unaccountable a lot of our officials are. But it's also revealed that people in this city are getting together in ways that are unexpected and are demanding accountability and taking bigger risks and making bigger demands. And so that's really exciting. I think what we have to do is we have to continue to grow that, and we have to just continue to fight back against this notion, which is that there's only one way and only one time and only one place to do it. And I just think that we've got to continue to imagine all the ways that we're going to hold these folks accountable.
Absolutely. Thank you. Ty Allen, closing thoughts, sir. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
4 years ago. Our forefathers. I'm sorry, it was too easy. I'm gonna give my first of all, I want to shout out how much I dislike Halisi and really like self-identifying my brothers. Hanif, thanks for having me. Tara, I don't know you, and we're gonna stay friends after this because you are quite brilliant. He said Mrs., so your husband must be lucky as hell. I'll say this, real talk, that I need these activists and anti-establishment folks to get off their motherfucking ass. I don't want to hear these conversations about how you are fighting the system. I don't want to hear about how you are asking the system. I don't want to hear about how you are begging the system. There's another option. Take over the system. The mechanisms for you to be office, to influence what happens are there. Almost every state has a district leader or a party. Almost every state has some type of legislature body, be it an alderman or a council person. Almost every county has some kind of county director or assembly or state. If you're not in it, then you're actually not helping. We need people to be in the room. And we need people like Hanif and Tara to be your backbone while you're in the room. And we need organizations like the one that Tara says she has and DRMAS has to be the accountability aspects for those who are influencing like us and those who are in the room. Because if you keep fighting from outside, eventually you're going to keep hitting another wall and another wall and another wall. You spend more time fighting than actually getting things done. But if you get your room behind in the room and you stay grounded in those that you believe in and those you say are there to help, you might actually change something. How do we know this? Because a long time ago, there would never have been something like the WPA. A long time ago, we would never have Social Security. So many things that we have now because people got in the room and fought for it. Women's rights, Asian rights, hell, the old-fashioned killing of slavery. These things happen because somebody got in the room and made it happen. Until we start to get in the room, all the blustering and bloviating and all the other words that Stephen A. Smith uses incorrectly are all that you are doing and is not helping anyone. So that's my little final thing. I'm begging y'all, please get in the room, be an influencer for the one in the room, attach yourself to organizations that will keep you accountable, and go to the communities that you want to serve and actually ask them what the fuck did they actually want.
Absolutely. All right.
Thank
you, sir. Hanif.
You know, this thing about accountability and of our elected officials is a really big thing. But, you know, I'm going to say something else that we didn't really say today. And that is, while it is very important for us to hold our elected officials accountable, it is extremely important for us to do that. We also have to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable. We also have to make sure that we're holding those that we're looking to support us accountable. Because when you want to hold your elected official accountable, you have to make sure that your character is above reproach. That doesn't mean you're perfect, but it means that you allow yourself to be held accountable so that you don't come in looking like the hypocrite that you're saying your elected official is when you get in the room. Because that's the only thing, because that's the thing that the way people succeed is when there's nothing for them to assassinate in your character. They can talk all the trash about you. They can dig up the F you got in your college history class. They can talk all the stuff about you, but when you are transparent about who you are, and it makes your ability to hold other people accountable even stronger than you think it is. So, yes, let's hold our elected officials accountable. Yes, let's make sure that they're doing the job that they're supposed to do. But let's also make sure that our character is above reproach when we're getting in these rooms, when we're getting in these places to hold other people accountable, so that we're not taking all this momentum and getting it killed at the door because we aren't doing the very things that we want done. We see this all the time in politics. People who promise, and never deliver because honestly, they never had any intention to. So let's make sure we're doing the work. And as Ty said, you know, and Dee, you've said it on this program before too. There are some of you out there that are watching that want to hold your officials accountable. I'm telling you, you're doing the wrong thing. You should be becoming the official. Some of you that are listening to this, that are saying, I want to join this movement to hold the mayor accountable, hold city council accountable. No, you should be running for mayor. You should be running for city council. You should be running for state congress, state senator, governor, president. You should be running. So if you want this system to do the work for the people, not only do you have to hold people accountable, your elected officials accountable, not only do you have to allow yourself to be held accountable, you have to also be accountable for getting your butt up into a place to be elected. Because it's not enough to rely on people who have never actually cared about our community in the first place.
All right. Well, thank you. Don't forget, Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without demand. The most brilliant thing I seen this past weekend, the reason why I enjoyed it so much is it made the mayor completely uncomfortable. I think it's our job to hold leadership accountable and make them feel as uncomfortable as possible. One thing I've learned in my short 50-something years of living is people rarely do anything you want them to do until you make them very, very, very uncomfortable. And if you can't get in the room, create your own room. Make the community your room. I think Tara, Ty, and he said something that was critical. Before you decide to start a movement, know your movement. You should know everything about it. And you should come into the room with an expected outcome. You should always have a plan. Know the community you say you're going to represent and know them well. Put a process in place to educate that community so that they know everything that you know. Doesn't make sense to build an army that with no information and no knowledge of what you're attempting to do. So you have the power. All power still lies in the hands of the people that have never changed. This is On Deck, Being Black in America. We want to thank everybody for tuning in. We want to thank everyone for joining us in this conversation today. Thank you, Tara, Hanif, Ty. And again, don't forget, we'll be back here next Sunday at 3 p.m. And again, we thank you for watching. With that being said, peace, everybody. We'll see you during the week.
God's walked in. Rejoice.